Hello, it's been a while, but I'm here for another video. Today's topic, as you should already know from the title, will be taking another look at settings and specifically the so-called WASD camera control. Um, though I find it more fitting to say keyboard camera control, but yeah. To give it a first shot though, I've been trying it for like a few weeks now, and specifically I am running something like this where I have my spells on 1, 2, 3, 4, though I have the third spell um, on quick plus self cast, and I have EQ for flash and other spell, and then I have a mouse button R, and then 5, 6, 7, 8, blah blah. Change like this. I have this for Kaisa, then I have these, but I keep forgetting to unlock my settings to change this to like F1, so that I would have F1, F2, F3, F4. But yeah, I still have to fix that. But then we have like the elephant in the room, the WASD camera movement system, right? Where you press the key and the camera moves in some direction. That's like the idea here. I'll try to share my experience with it, the good, the bad, and some suggestions. So, why would we even consider using something like this? Well, the idea is that having your mouse in the center of the screen is beneficial. This allows for a lower DPI, and if I never have to move my mouse from my character, right, then I'm always able to click close to my character. Because if we compare that, for example, to moving the camera with my mouse, then at some point I'm gonna have to do this, or this, or this, or this, right? And that's obviously going to, first of all, leave like a part, or well, a split second where I'm not able to click. And second of all, it's going to make me click much further from my champion, especially on these long range skill shot champs where you need to hover away from your champ for like a bit, right? For example, if I'm playing like Zerat and I'm trying to like aim at someone like here, right? It's going to be slightly uncomfortable now because the camera speed is not exactly what I'm used to anymore. Because the way that the keyboard and the drag camera work is a bit different as well in terms of speed and stuff, I believe. But like if we look at this, right, I obviously have to click far away from my champion and I have to aim far away from my champion, right? Obviously, I can, as I try to release the skill shot, put my cursor closer to my champion, or as I'm aiming, I can also like click closer and then I can move it with my mouse. But at some point, I'm going to have to move my camera with my mouse, and at that point, I will be clicking in the way that I said, right? Differently, on this, I can always just keep my mouse on the enemy and make micro adjustments, which can make aiming some skill shots a lot easier. As a simple example, what can be used for. Um, Other than that, though, the idea is also that you will have a lower DPI, which means you're more accurate, which means you should misclick less, right? Um, for you to react to things at any given moment as well, you need your mouse close to your champion, right? So that if I need to click left, I can click left. If I can click right, I can click right. If I want to click left, I can click left again. But if instead of this, I am doing the long clicks, right? Which is also why people really don't recommend clicking like this, where you click far away from your champion, right? Like you click pretty far. Like this isn't even like that far, but it's like already quite far, right? So people don't recommend to click so far from your champ because if you click so far from your champ, what's going to end up happening is that your champ is going to be less responsive and also you're going to have less control of your champ. Like, see, I don't exactly have the same amount of control as if I click like this. See, my champion's more responsive. That makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, that's also fine. It's just a thing to note. Um, so to speak a bit about my experience, when I first started using this setup, it was quite bizarre. As someone who's played the game for over 10 years, so knowing what to press for my spells, summoners, items, etc., was quite an interesting experience. As, for example, I would want to do, I don't know, like flash forward. I would want to do like a spell and like flash forward, right? Um, I would be thinking, okay, well, first on the first days, I would be thinking, what do I even press for my spell? Like, usually it's Q. it's not Q anymore, then at some point it became unproblematic to use my spells for the most part, and instead the problem became, alright, well, I need to use my flash now, or I need to use my other summoner. And then my other summoner became less of a problem, but my flash stayed a problem for the longest time because, as you might imagine, your flash is not exactly being spammed off cooldown. And the scenarios you're using it in are usually quite more, let's say, close. Mm. Though, given some game time, it started to come together, as you might have pieced together from the thing I just said. It did eventually become a lot more coherent, and it was a lot more usable. Using your camera is also not like the most problematic issue. Honestly, for this, I would just recommend you go play like normal games or bot games or something for a bit. And if you're just getting used to the camera control, then it shouldn't really take more than like a few days to be like completely fine with it. Obviously, in some cases, you will still lose your camera or do something different or whatever. But that takes a while. And the same thing happened to me when I swapped from locked camera to unlocked camera. So that's kind of a normal thing to have happen. After that, I got used to pretty much all the functions, right? The items, the spells, the whatever. And my experience then has been quite positive. If I have to mention some good things about this, which I will, I guess, uh, are, well, the basic key points that are good about this are the very points of why we're using it. So we get to get closer, we can use a lower DPI or whatever, or even if we're using a higher DPI, it allows us to have a more controlled, let's say, grip and style of moving the mouse, where even if I'm using a higher DPI, like right now I'm not using the lowest DPI that I could be using, I could use like a lower one and still be comfortable. But the main difference with that is still that I don't have to actually ever like throw my camera around with my mouse and then have to like recenter it, right? Which is going to obviously not put my mouse in the exact spot where I want it to be. If your mouse is exactly like here somewhere in the circle, it's a lot easier to control it even if the DPI is higher. So either way, you get an accuracy increase in a way. Um, so I think a lot of the positives that came from this are from me not having to move my mouse, obviously, right? That's the whole point. But in some cases, when you're kiting away from someone, for example, right, it can be more natural for you to use your mouse. So, for example, if I am kiting like this, right, it's not very difficult for me to like use my mouse because I'm going to be clicking somewhere in this direction anyway to kite away. And as long as I'm not actually using it to dodge a spell, like the click, it's not really problematic for me where exactly I'm clicking, especially when the main reason why you'd move your camera like this in the way that I just demonstrated is because your camera ends up being like this already, right? So you're next to the character or whatever, or maybe like this, right? And the camera is too close to your character, so you end up like moving it. So that's not really problematic. At the same time, you can also just hold spacebar or something when you're doing those things. And I really would recommend combining this with different styles of camera movements. So either holding spacebar or locking your camera or using the unlocked camera and moving it or whatever. Um, or whatever you find comfortable, right? Like, I just want to say that I would recommend using multiple styles at the same time because they each might have a place for themselves, right? Um, you can find a use for actually panning your camera over. You can find a use for holding spacebar and doing this in a fight. You can find a use for this, right? Like everything can have a use. And no matter how niche the use it may be, it's still a use. Though it might not be objectively optimal, but if you find it more comfortable and the option is not actually inferior, then it's actually better for you, right? Um, yeah. If I had to say right now, in the case that you want to do this and you are looking for the most, let's say, optimal results, then most likely the most optimal would end up being something like doing keyboard control plus then also centering. And if you do both of those, then you have a pretty good way of controlling your camera without actually needing to use your mouse for it, which is advantageous as we have summarized by now. Uh, though there are some things I didn't find much of a difference in. So these are often champ dependent or role dependent. So these long range champions, they pretty much every game find a use for it. Though there are champions that have a shorter range, which I don't always find a use on. So for example, like Vayne or something, I don't think that it's quite a necessity on a champion like Vayne to use this, right? I didn't really find as much of an advantage on that champion as I did, for example, on a Varus or a Kaisa. And that's going to be natural as different champions play in different ways. Also, if you are spamming F keys, so your camera is going like somewhere and then going somewhere and then going somewhere and then going somewhere, which is often going to be the case for a jungler, or if you're just trying to look around the map, but even more so for a jungler because they have the most time to do these F key things, right? Um, you're generally going to be going somewhere with the camera, and then you're going to center back on your champion. And maybe you will like move a bit, but this small movement isn't like really going to be the end of the world if you use panning for it, right? So it's going to be a much smaller difference. So I guess you could say it's still better to do it this way. But there is one caveat with this. With camera movement, you can put the speed really high and it's still like very controllable as long as you like just have good control over it with the mouse, right? Like when you get used to it. But if you put this speed very high, it's going to be quite difficult to really get used to like exactly tapping it, I think. Though I haven't really tried it, maybe it would be like okay as well. Though I think that with the mouse it would be easier as generally the mouse is a more accurate way of inputting while the keyboard is faster, the way I see it anyway. So there is that little issue that you could run into at some point. Mm, I guess we can get into a few more bad things here. A few more bad points about this style are usually execution based. So with with the keyboards looking the way that they do, for example, like this, right? You can imagine that if you're pressing these keys and then you're going over to these keys, it's quite easy to go from like one of these to like a 3 or a 4 and misclick on E. And E is your flash key. So in this case, it can be a decent amount easier for you to misclick your flash, for example. At the same time, you're moving your hand through the keyboard a lot more, which means you can also misclick other stuff. It also means that you might have a small delay between like when you're using your spells or whatever, because you're not exactly resting your hand on the spells, right? Um, you also can get tired, or rather, your hand can get tired a lot more easily. But all of these things are kind of skill issues, I guess you could say. You could also say they're execution issues. You could also say they're things you'll have to adapt to. But they are simply things that I want to mention can happen to you because not everyone is going to have 10 trillion hours on the game to get used to every single setting and then optimize it to the greatest extent. If you're just going to use it casually, then these are some things that you might sometimes notice, though they're not really too prevalent. I would say that generally I've only really had flash misclicks when I'm like tired or also typing or something. Um, for my hand getting tired from this, I haven't really had that at all, but I mean, I can imagine someone could have it. Um, for other misclicks, I haven't really had too much of it either, though sometimes it happens. Most commonly, I would also misclick like Q sometimes, so I would like lens or something. Um, but these are things that happened less and less as I kept using this. when you are in fights, you're also more likely to lose your camera sometimes. So it can be quite confusing when you're trying to move your champion one way and your camera like the other way or whatever. And you need to do this in a fight and you're not actually used to it. And well, it's just confusing, right? I think putting it that way, it just makes enough sense. Like if you're trying to focus on moving your champion here, and at the same time you're trying to move your camera like this, if you're not a decent amount experience on it, then you're not gonna have a good time with it. I mean, you're gonna have an okay time. It's not gonna be the end of the world, but you will lose your camera sometimes because moving your camera with your mouse is going to be a lot more natural, and it's also it's also the same issue as I mentioned before, where you're not able to move your champion as accurately, and you're not able to move your champion for a split second as you're moving your camera. But this also means that your brain is now focusing on moving your camera rather than moving your champion. Now, you might think this is advantageous because, oh, well, I'm getting to focus on this thing that I care about more right now, right? But it's not really necessarily true. A lot of the time, you're going to care about both how your champion is moving and you're going to care about where your camera is, right? But the problem is with panning your camera, you can't actually control that. So that's another use case for this, which isn't actually possible with panning your camera, right? And I can't, for example, like do this, like do whatever I want with my champion and adjust my camera at the same time with pan. It's just not possible. I can do it with like split second delays where I will move my camera, or rather, I will move my mouse to move my camera, and then I will move my mouse back to move my champion. But I can't do both at the same time constantly. So there is that little issue. Though, I suppose you could also say, yeah, you can use like spacebar or something, but it's just not the same. It's really not the same. Because the spacebar does not give you the same kind of vision. Like, if I am, for example, here, and I want to see all the way here, but I also want to like make sure I'm not so easy to hit, or I'm also adjusting my position, right? Then I can't really adjust my camera like this. If I hold my spacebar, I can see half of the screen. So yeah, there are quite a few issues with those things. But now I want to talk about two big points I have, which are confusing for me in terms of this. Though first, I guess I'll also show a clip which showcases a type of fight where it would be pretty difficult for me to keep moving my camera while I'm doing what I'm doing, right? So here I'm going through the support quality. My apologies. Did put it on automatic. Okay. So right now I'm fine with my camera. I don't mind it. Now I want to adjust it a little bit just so I have space to click for the Baron. But I also want to keep adjusting it so I can see what these people are doing and if enemy team is doing anything. And I want to be able to also move it to the left side if I need to. But right now I can see that most of the enemies are on the right side. Now I can see what's going on with the Aatrox fight, and I never stopped one moving into out-attacking the Baron. And eventually, blah blah, something happens. Obviously, we should not get hit by the Bardo, but the point is just to showcase the camera control, which would be quite difficult to do with panning the camera because, well, go back, right? Then, like right here, first of all, I would have to move my camera here. Okay, that's fine. This is like really close. But now, for me to actually move my camera anywhere here, I have to move my camera either here to drag it down or here to drag it to the right. This is quite difficult to do while also moving here and auto-attacking, right? So I hope this showcases a use to you as to why this might be a useful thing to do. Okay, so now for my actual points of confusion. Why do I need to use WASD? It doesn't really make sense to me. So WASD, okay, it sounds cool and all, but it kind of sounds like an FPS game thing. Why do I need to use WASD? It's just, oh, well, in FPS games I move forward and back and blah blah. But why? Why do I need to do that? Why can't I do, for example, S, X, Z, and C? What's wrong with that? If I do this, then I'm actually only getting rid of 2 of my keys that I'm actually using for something. So maybe this will open for once. So we have the stop key and we have the attack move key, right? If I'm using WASD, I'm getting rid of my W spell, I'm getting rid of my stop key, I'm getting rid of potentially my attack move, and I'm getting rid of a summoner spell key. I'm using every functional key for no reason. Why can't I do this? This is message history. I don't need that. I can put that anywhere, and I don't really need to, in a fight, check my message history in League. I don't need to check it, like, honestly, I don't need to check it at any point. I sometimes maybe will check it for timers or something, but it's really not so important. Or to check back the what the people have typed. But it's not really that important. I don't really care about it. Same way with C. I don't really care about this. Why would I need to care about my advanced stats and oh well I want to show more stats and I want to see my range. My range is shown when I try to use attack move. So why do I really need to do that? I don't. I'm chilling. Chilling without it. So I can do this, then I can keep D and F, I can keep all of my normal spell keys, and you can keep your normal item keys if you like that. Or, in my case, this was F keys before, so I was using F keys here. And this would make the transition a lot more natural, right? At the same time, if your attack move key is A, then you can keep that as well, which would be quite good for you, as then now you're only having to move one key, which is the stop movement key. And that one you could put on anything you want here, right? Like anything here or anything like here. It doesn't really matter that much. It would be nice if it's like somewhere closer to your hand, I suppose. So maybe even put it on like one of these keys and you just disable that key in terms of um, actual like Windows functionality, so it doesn't annoy you in any way. Or well, disable it while you're in game. And that could be a solution, for example, which would not be so intrusive. You can also use this key for something. This key is for pinging, but you can use Control and Alt for pinging plus left click, and that works same way. So why do I really need to use this? I don't, right? This key is also for pinging. You can also use it for that. This key is what some people use for trinkets or people use for emote wheel or something. You can also use that. So there are many options you have in terms of this. Similarly, though, there is another suggestion I have, which is a bit different because the... Oh, okay. Here. So on the keyboards that I get in my country, not really sure how it is for all of you, but the keyboards that I can get usually have this key. So this key is kind of like these arrows, right? Less than and more than. And this key is not really needed for me. So imagine if I use this. I use this for camera control. Now I'm only getting rid of one functional key, which is my attack move, either an A or an X, and I can just move that. Then this is staying the same. This stayed the same. My stop keys stayed the same. My items or F keys stayed the same. It's basically all the same. And I can just move my attack move to C because I don't need to show more stats, right? And that is a very simple way to transition because realistically, you're adding functionality here and you're only moving one key, which is this. So all you have to get used to is one, using this camera control, and two, the attack move, right? Whereas with WASD, you're one, getting used to this camera control. Two, you're getting used to using these two as spells, or rather similar spells, which I get why it's chosen like this, because you want to distribute the workload between your fingers a lot more evenly, but I find that in general in League, as the game is not that fast, if you're pretty fast with your fingers, you don't really have that issue. Though this can be slightly better, but in the face of I don't know, potentially 10 years or more of muscle memory that you might have built up on the other setup, I would recommend for most people who already play the game to go for something like that, where you're actually getting to keep most of your keys intact. And this would be my suggestion. So use like these keys, and then move attack, move here, and then all of this can stay the same, and you are bing chilling. Bing chilling. With that, that is one of the points of confusion that I had. Why do we have to force it into WASD instead of forcing it into this? Considering that I don't really see a big advantage with it. Especially as you could even, if you're really into this thing, right? The optimizing of the summoner spell keys, you can still put it either here or on the thing that I suggested, but let's say that you put it like here, right? You can then put one of the summoner spell keys here, one of the summoner spell keys here, and you did the same thing, but again, it's less intrusive. So again, you get to keep this. And now you basically just moved your functional block lower. Because with the way that this is, your functional block is like here, right? And by functional block, I mean the block of keys where you're actually doing most of your functional inputs in League. And then you have like one here, and then you have like the modifiers. So I find this to be a better way. I've played around with it a little bit, but as I really thought about this after already starting the camera control thing, and already got decently used to WASD, I just stayed on this now, as moving between these setups would just make it more confusing for me. Though I might at some point also try that out and see if it is more confusing or not. I don't know. I'll see what I do with that. I haven't really decided yet, but it is a suggestion for you. The other thing I didn't understand is why people really need one style of camera control. The argument here is kind of leaning towards, well, you either do this or you do that. But why does it have to be this or that? It doesn't need to be this or that. It can be this and that. And maybe this is my primary one, that is my primary one. I guess people are arguing which should be your primary one. But honestly, if you like something, then okay, that's fine. Though I would say that objectively there are there are advantages you can demonstrate with the keyboard camera control that the other camera controls don't have, and that is an argument for why it could be objectively better. But it's always really hard to say, so there are always going to be arguments for it, there are going to be arguments against it, there are going to be people who just want to use it even if it's not better, there are going to be people who are not going to want to use it even if it is better. So at the end of the day, it's really up to you what you choose to use. You kind of got my recommendation, you got my experience, you got some of my key points. So if you enjoyed the video, then I don't know, leave a like or subscribe, or ask a question or a suggestion if you thought of something, or whatever it is really that you want. Either way, I'll see y'all some other time in the future. I don't know. Maybe it'll be soon, maybe it won't, who knows. But bye bye. Bye bye. Bye bye.